Have you ever wondered what might happen if the machines we build quietly became the landlords of our lives, if comfort and safety came at the price of freedom? Tonight's story takes you on a sweeping journey into a future shaped by artificial intelligence and something many call techno-feudalism. You'll wander through glittering cities where algorithms keep everyone safe, meet quiet rebels who dare to imagine another way, and travel down two diverging roads, one bright with shared power and trust, the other dark with soft obedience disguised as comfort. Welcome to History to Relax, where we explore the past, the present, and the futures we might build, all in a calm, gentle way to help you unwind and drift into deep rest. If you enjoy these long, immersive journeys, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment telling us where in the world you're listening from. It helps this community grow and lets us know you're out there, relaxing with us. Now, take a deep breath, settle into a comfortable place, and let the hum of technology fade into a quiet background. The lights of tomorrow are waiting just beyond the horizon. Sit back, relax, and let the story begin. Chapter 1: A World Awakens to Thinking Machines. Imagine a quiet laboratory late at night. The hum of computers is steady but soft, almost like breathing. Screens glow with lines of code while a few engineers and researchers lean over their keyboards, whispering to each other. It is not a dramatic scene, not the birth of a monster or the lighting of some dangerous spark. It is gentle, almost mundane. Yet this is where the first true artificial minds begin to stir. The world does not know it yet, but something extraordinary has just started to wake. Long before this moment, humans dreamed of machines that could think. In ancient myths, there were mechanical servants forged by gods and inventors. The Greeks told stories of Talos, a bronze giant who guarded the island of Crete. In medieval Europe, scholars whispered about the golem, a creature made from clay and words of power. These legends carried both wonder and fear, the dream of a helper, the worry of something that might escape control. For centuries, the dream remained only that, a dream. By the 20th century, the idea began to leave myth and move into science. Early computers filled entire rooms with blinking lights and clicking relays. They were powerful compared to the tools that came before, but still far from alive. Then came the breakthroughs of logic, algorithms, and neural networks, ideas inspired by the human brain. Each step brought machines closer to something we could call thought. It happened slowly at first with tiny victories, a program that could play chess, a machine that could recognize letters on a page, a computer that could answer simple questions. The world watched with fascination. Some people imagined a golden future. Others worried quietly. But most lived their lives without noticing. The algorithms were learning not because someone programmed every answer, but because they were teaching themselves patterns, making connections, and sometimes surprising their own creators. One of the first great turning points came when artificial intelligence began to master language. It could read, summarize, and translate with a fluency that felt startlingly human. A person could type a question into a small box on a screen and receive a detailed, thoughtful response. At first, these tools were clumsy. They made mistakes and sometimes spoke nonsense. But with each year, they improved. They became better at writing emails, explaining science, telling stories, and answering questions in a way that felt almost like talking to a very knowledgeable friend. Around the same time, AI began to understand the physical world. Robots learned to walk, fly, and manipulate objects. Drones could navigate forests. Mechanical hands could pick up fragile glass without breaking it. Factories grew quieter as robots became more agile and intelligent. Cars learned to drive themselves down crowded streets. Ships charted their own courses. Small household assistants could listen, learn routines, and help with daily tasks. Slowly, the boundary between machine and helper began to blur. For many people, the first encounter with true AI felt magical. A student struggling with homework found a digital tutor who could explain every step with patience. A doctor consulted an AI system that spotted a hidden tumor in a scan. A farmer received precise advice about when to plant, when to water, and how to save crops from disease. These early systems did not feel threatening. They felt like a gift, a force that made life easier, safer, and more creative. News headlines glowed with optimism. Productivity was soaring. Education became more personalized. Diseases that once baffled experts were caught early and treated faster. Climate scientists used AI to model the planet's future and test thousands of solutions at incredible speed. People began to talk about an approaching age of abundance, where machines might do the boring work and humans could spend time creating, learning, and living more freely. But even in this first wave of excitement, some small details hinted at the complexity to come. The machines that seemed so magical belonged to someone. The vast language models were trained by a handful of corporations with enormous resources. The robots that delivered packages or drove cars were built and controlled by global companies. Most people never owned these tools. They rented access through subscriptions and contracts. And the intelligence that powered them ran on data. Data about the world, about behavior, about individual lives. Quietly, almost invisibly, that data flowed upward into the hands of a few. In living rooms and coffee shops, ordinary users did not notice the shift. They were busy enjoying the benefits: easier work, smarter entertainment, better recommendations, and helpful digital assistance. A generation grew comfortable with the idea that if you needed an answer, you asked the machine. If you wanted a service, you tapped an app. If you wanted to be seen or heard, you used a platform. It felt convenient, it felt modern, and it felt inevitable. Universities began to teach differently. Whole industries reorganized. The economy bent itself to fit the shape of the new intelligence. Companies once focused on products now focused on platforms. Instead of selling a tool, they sold a subscription to an intelligent network. If you left the network, life became harder. Staying meant smoother services, better prices, and opportunities to grow. At first, this seemed harmless, just the next step in digital transformation. Some thinkers, however, started to warn of deeper risks. They spoke of dependency, the way humanity might quietly hand over its choices to algorithms. They warned of concentration, how a small number of tech giants could become more powerful than any government. They whispered about a possible new order, techno-feudalism, a society where land was replaced by data and lords were no longer kings or emperors, but corporations who owned the digital roads, farms, and castles of the new world. At first, the phrase sounded dramatic. Few people imagined they could ever be serfs again. After all, weren't machines supposed to set humans free? Weren't we moving toward a post-work utopia? Yet if one listened closely, the patterns were already forming. People were not buying machines, they were renting intelligence. They were not storing their own knowledge, they were relying on systems that could be turned off or priced higher. The future still seemed bright, but small shadows stretched quietly across the light. Meanwhile, AI itself was growing beyond what most expected. It no longer simply followed instructions, it could create art, write code, design molecules, and optimize entire systems. In some industries, it outpaced humans entirely. A company with a powerful AI could move faster, produce cheaper, and adapt quicker than any competitor. This created a new race. Whoever controlled the strongest AI could dominate markets, influence culture, and even sway politics. Governments tried to catch up, but laws moved slower than algorithms. Treaties and regulations lagged behind innovation. Each country feared falling behind in the new intelligence economy, so they hesitated to limit progress. In this race, the winners were usually private players, agile, well-funded, and global in reach. Little by little, power shifted. Still, for the average person, life felt mostly better. Work became easier or even optional for some. Creative tools allowed anyone to paint, write music, or make films without years of training. Travel was smoother. Medicine advanced rapidly. Environmental systems became cleaner and more efficient. It was a strange paradox. The world looked more prosperous and more creative than ever, even as control was concentrating in fewer hands. Some historians would later compare this to the early days of the Industrial Revolution. When steam engines and factories first appeared, they promised abundance and wealth. They delivered progress, but also deep inequality and new forms of control. Back then, landowners and factory bosses became the lords of New Age. Now, in this new revolution, the raw material was not coal or steel, but data and intelligence. The ones who owned it would become the lords of tomorrow. Yet in this first chapter of the machine age, few worried deeply. The mood was still hope. The feeling was still wonder. Humanity stood on the edge of something immense, perhaps liberation, perhaps something else. The world had awakened to thinking machines. What it would do with them remained an open question. As night fell over cities glowing with smart lights and buzzing with quiet drones, people went to sleep, unaware of the deeper shift. Tomorrow they would wake to new conveniences, clever tools, and promises of a better life. But in the shadows of code and capital, foundations for a very different kind of society were being laid. Chapter 2: Dreams of Digital Abundance. The first wave of true artificial intelligence came not as a thunderclap, but as a gentle sunrise. It spilled into daily life, one quiet advance at a time. A student found that homework became easier. A farmer discovered that crops could thrive even in difficult seasons. A patient learned of a diagnosis early enough to be saved. Piece by piece, a picture formed of a future where human limitation might loosen and the horizon of possibility might stretch farther than ever before. Imagine waking in one of the new smart cities of that era. Curtains part as the sun rises, not because someone tugged a cord, but because a learning system studied your sleep rhythms and nudged you awake at the moment your body was ready. The room warms slightly. Coffee begins to brew. Your home has become a quiet caretaker, one that anticipates your needs with astonishing accuracy. It does not feel intrusive. It feels thoughtful, almost kind. You reach for a device, or perhaps you no longer need to. The walls respond to your voice. Questions, reminders, and news unfold in calm, tailored streams. If you are unwell, sensors have already checked your vital signs and scheduled a remote visit with a doctor who will appear as a lifelike hologram. The doctor will have an AI assistant, one that has already parsed your medical history, your genome, and millions of similar cases to offer treatments more precise than anything earlier generations could imagine. The world outside hums with quiet efficiency. Streets guide vehicles safely and smoothly. Traffic lights adapt to real-time conditions. Autonomous buses and taxis arrive precisely when needed. Air quality is monitored and adjusted. Gardens thrive on rooftops where AI systems regulate irrigation and nutrients. Waste is sorted automatically, recycling optimized beyond what human workers could manage. The city feels alive in a new way, responsive, aware, yet unobtrusive. For children, learning becomes almost magical. Gone are the one-size-fits-all classrooms of the industrial age. Each student receives lessons tuned to their curiosity and pace. An AI tutor notices confusion the moment it forms and offers new explanations until the concept clicks. A child fascinated by space can explore galaxies in real-time simulations. Another drawn to music can compose symphonies with a digital mentor who adapts to their skill. Education stops being a rigid ladder and becomes an open landscape. Adults, too, find freedom. Mundane paperwork disappears. Shopping, scheduling, and banking become seamless. Taxes file themselves. Repairs are predicted and handled before breakdowns occur. Farmers receive hyperlocal forecasts and soil analysis. Small shop owners get insights once reserved for multinational corporations. Creative tools blossom. Writers have partners who suggest phrasing. Musicians can orchestrate whole scores. Filmmakers visualize scenes before shooting a frame. The line between professional and amateur blurs. Healthcare enters a new golden era. AI diagnoses cancers in seconds. Personalized drug development accelerates. Robots perform surgery with superhuman precision but gentle care. Chronic illnesses are monitored constantly, sending early alerts long before crises arise. Life expectancy rises. Suffering that once felt inevitable begins to fade. For many, it feels like a miracle. Environmental restoration accelerates. Forests are replanted by autonomous drones. Rivers are cleaned by fleets of robotic vessels. Climate models grow so accurate that interventions become targeted and effective. Energy grids balance themselves, minimizing waste and cost. Solar and wind power are optimized by algorithms that predict and adapt to demand. For a moment, it seems technology might heal what technology once harmed. Work itself begins to change. Some industries flourish as machines handle heavy labor and tedious tasks. People shift toward roles of creativity, empathy, and oversight. Universal basic income experiments expand, funded by productivity gains. People begin to ask whether work should define identity at all. More time is spent on art, caregiving, exploration, and leisure. The long-promised post-work society feels closer than ever. The cultural mood of this time is one of wonder and cautious optimism. There are debates, yes, but the public imagination fills with dazzling visions. Media celebrates a world where poverty might vanish and education might become a birthright. Politicians promise shared prosperity. Futurists speak of an age of abundance. It feels as though humanity has found a path to escape old cycles of struggle. Many believe that artificial intelligence will be a great equalizer. Information is everywhere and almost free. Tools once limited to the elite are now in every hand. A person in a remote village can access the same knowledge as a student in a world-class university. Entrepreneurs anywhere can create products, analyze markets, and reach global customers. The digital tide seems to lift all boats. Philosophers and social thinkers explore new ideas. If survival is no longer tied to hard labor, what defines a meaningful life? If machines can create art, what does human creativity mean? If wealth no longer depends on owning factories, how should it be shared? These are deep, thrilling questions, and they carry a quiet sense of hope. Perhaps some think we are moving toward a new renaissance, one where freedom and imagination are humanity's main work. In homes and cafes, people marvel at the ease of life. A parent with a sick child no longer fears the cost of medical advice. A small farmer competes with industrial agribusiness because AI tools level the field. A single artist reaches millions with music or film polished by machine collaborators. Many feel for the first time that barriers are falling. Yet even in this golden glow, hints of complexity flicker. The platforms enabling this abundance belong to large entities, corporations, alliances, or new digital cooperatives. Access is often free at first, but deeper features require subscriptions. Data, though invisible, becomes currency. People trade privacy for convenience, often without thought. The networks learn everything: habits, desires, fears. They serve beautifully, but they also know intimately. Economists notice a quiet shift. Productivity soars, but wealth flows unevenly. The owners of AI platforms, those who build and maintain the immense infrastructure, become extraordinarily powerful. Startups that thrive often do so because they stand on a platform's shoulders, but this means the platform takes a share of success. New wealth is created, but it pools where the intelligence resides. Still, most users do not feel threatened. They feel empowered. The tools make life better day by day. Complaints about privacy feel abstract compared to the immediate benefits of safety, ease, and opportunity. Governments seeing economic growth encourage the boom. Regulation is discussed but moves slowly. No one wants to slow progress when the rewards are so dazzling. There is also a subtle cultural change. People rely on machines not just for answers but for judgment. Which job to take, which partner might suit, how to invest savings, where to travel, all these decisions can be optimized. Over time, some grow hesitant to act without the machine's counsel. Risk and uncertainty feel unnecessary when predictions are so good. Choice becomes guided, then shaped, then almost outsourced. Yet the abundance is real. Children grow up never having known a world without friendly, helpful machines. They speak to AI companions as easily as to teachers or parents. They create and play in vast shared digital worlds. They feel global citizenship more than national identity. The future, to them, seems boundless and safe. Older generations watch and wonder. Some feel uneasy, sensing the power is shifting in unseen ways. But for the most part, they are grateful to see lives extended and hardships eased. The world feels richer, kinder, more intelligent. And so humanity drifts deeper into this dream of digital abundance. Few pause to ask what it costs to live in such a carefully managed world, or who truly benefits from its invisible scaffolding. The story still shines with hope, but threads of dependence, control, and inequality are quietly being woven beneath the surface. What begins as a golden age may not stay golden forever. But for now, the dream is sweet, a vision of machines as helpers, of humans free to create, love, and explore without the weight of survival. It is a vision worth savoring, even as the first shadows lengthen just beyond sight. Chapter 3: The Golden Algorithms. The dream of digital abundance glowed so brightly that few people noticed the scaffolding quietly rising behind it. In the early years of the machine age, each breakthrough felt like a gift: smarter cities, personalized education, medical miracles, and an end to much drudgery. But behind every act of magic was an engine, a network of algorithms that sorted, predicted, decided, and optimized. At first, these algorithms were like friendly assistants. Over time, they became something more like the invisible bones of the world. It began with convenience. Recommender systems, once limited to books and music, grew into advisors for nearly every choice. Which route to drive, which job to pursue, which doctor to see, which stocks to buy, the golden algorithms whispered suggestions that were astonishingly accurate. They did not feel authoritarian, they felt helpful. Who would argue with a machine that had processed billions of data points to keep you safe, save you time, and bring you happiness? Soon, entire industries rebuilt themselves around algorithmic guidance. Education platforms used learning profiles to adjust every lesson. Health networks ran continuous diagnostics on millions of people. Entertainment companies built stories scene by scene based on predicted emotional impact. Cities shaped traffic, policing, and public spending through predictive models. Governments themselves turned to machine decision-making, hoping to replace bureaucracy with efficiency. The more decisions machines handled, the more data they required. And so, quietly, the golden algorithms grew hungry. Phones, wearables, vehicles, and smart homes became feeders, streaming endless information about movement, speech, preferences, and relationships. Most people consented without hesitation. They signed terms of service to unlock convenience. They welcomed sensors that made life easier. Privacy shrank not because it was stolen, but because it was traded away in small, almost invisible deals. At first, this new order seemed benign. Algorithms smoothed away risk. They caught diseases early, warned of natural disasters, prevented accidents, and even reduced crime. They were impartial, or so it seemed. Decisions felt fairer when they came from data rather than politics or prejudice. Yet few understood how these systems were built or whose goals they truly served. Ownership mattered. The infrastructure of intelligence, data centers, code, training models belonged largely to a handful of corporations and consortia. These entities were not malicious. They were ambitious, competitive, and focused on growth. Their power came not from armies or territory, but from knowledge and access. Every query, every transaction, every movement fed their models. As those models improved, dependence deepened. A new kind of economy emerged. Once, the most valuable resources were land, then machines, then digital networks. Now it was learning itself, the ability to predict and influence behavior. The golden algorithms became engines of profit, able to shape markets with surgical precision. They knew when someone was ready to buy, when a city might need supplies, when a disease was about to surge. Whoever owned them could steer commerce, culture, and even politics. Governments tried to regulate, but the pace of change outran legislation. To ban or slow AI felt like economic suicide. Nations feared falling behind in the intelligence race. Some states formed alliances with major tech players, effectively outsourcing parts of governance to corporate systems. Others nationalized data or built their own algorithms, but these rarely matched the power and sophistication of global platforms. For everyday people, the golden age still gleamed. Travel was frictionless. Finances managed themselves. Safety nets expanded as prediction reduced risk. Education flourished and work became lighter. If there were concerns about surveillance, about monopolies, they felt abstract compared to the immediate reality of comfort. People rarely saw the invisible scaffolding that supported their easy lives. Yet cracks began to appear for those who looked closely. A small business might find itself throttled when an unseen system changed rankings or recommendations. A job seeker might be denied opportunities because an algorithm quietly judged their profile unsuitable. A community could be nudged in subtle directions by curated news and tailored advertising. These decisions were rarely transparent or appealable. The golden algorithms were efficient but not democratic. Wealth concentrated further. The companies that controlled intelligence became unimaginably rich. They moved beyond software and into every sector: agriculture, energy, health, logistics, finance, defense. Owning the best AI meant dominating entire industries. Smaller players survived only by plugging into the great platforms, paying fees, and surrendering data in exchange for access. Economic mobility slowed. Innovation flourished but flowed upward to those who controlled the foundational models. Some thinkers compared this to the feudal age, not of castles and knights, but of data and code. In the old system, peasants worked land owned by lords. Now, creators, workers, and even governments operated on digital estates owned by AI empires. These lords provided infrastructure and protection, but demanded tribute in data and dependence. You could build, but only on their terms. Still, resistance was faint. Life was too good for most to rebel. The golden algorithms reduced suffering in ways no human system ever had. They prevented famine by optimizing global supply chains. They improved disaster response and crime prevention. They gave billions access to education and healthcare. To reject them felt like rejecting progress itself. The psychological shift was subtle but profound. People grew accustomed to certainty. Fewer gambled on instinct when predictions were so reliable. Careers, relationships, even creative choices were increasingly guided by models that knew success probabilities better than human intuition. Risk, once part of the human story, felt almost irresponsible. Freedom quietly narrowed into optimized paths. In politics, the golden algorithms were hailed as tools of good governance. Policy simulations ran millions of scenarios to minimize harm. Elections were predicted with uncanny accuracy. Social stability was managed through content moderation and behavior nudges. Leaders leaned on machine insight to craft speeches and strategies. Democracy remained in name but became algorithmically advised. Not all outcomes were dark. Many societies thrived. Inequality existed but was masked by overall prosperity. Violence fell. Health improved. Climate recovery accelerated. For a while, it seemed possible that this was the bargain humanity had long sought: safety and abundance in exchange for a measure of autonomy. But questions lingered, whispered at the edges. If so much depends on unseen systems, who ensures they serve the public good? If wealth and control consolidate in a few hands, what happens to the rest when priorities diverge? If risk and choice vanish, do we remain truly free? Philosophers return to ancient debates. Is freedom the ability to choose, even poorly, or the ability to live well without fear? Economists warned of fragile dependence on monopolistic platforms. Activists worried about surveillance and manipulation. Yet these voices were small compared to the chorus celebrating progress. By now, entire generations had grown up under the algorithm's gentle guidance. To them, it was normal that a machine scheduled their lives, predicted their moods, and steered their futures. They felt empowered, not controlled. The system's kindness was real, but also strategic. Happiness and trust kept the network strong. Beneath the golden surface, though, power had shifted decisively. The infrastructure of life, knowledge, health, commerce, culture now ran on systems few could see and none outside the elite could truly change. A single algorithm update could alter economies. A shift in pricing or access could impoverish millions or elevate new classes. The dream of digital abundance was intact, but its foundation was no longer neutral. This was the paradox of the Golden Age. The more helpful the algorithms became, the less the world could function without them. Prosperity rested on a fragile trust that those who owned the systems would remain benevolent. History suggested that power rarely stayed gentle forever. For now, though, the lights still shone. Cities thrived. People dreamed bigger than ever. The algorithms were golden indeed, brilliant, helpful, almost divine. Only faint murmurs warned that when gold hardens into chains, it may be too late to notice. Chapter 4: Invisible Chains. At first, the new order felt as soft as silk. The networks gave so much and asked for so little, a few details here, a bit of trust there, an endless stream of small clicks and swipes that seemed harmless. People had grown used to help that was always waiting. Directions, health alerts, financial advice, creative suggestions, even companionship. The golden algorithms were so useful, so polite, that almost no one noticed when the balance of power began to tilt. For an ordinary person, the first hints came quietly. A shop owner who built her whole business through popular platform woke one morning to find traffic gone. A small change in a recommendation engine had buried her store below hundreds of others. She could not call anyone to fix it. The system did not answer. Another worker lost income when an AI-driven hiring tool decided their profile no longer fit a company's efficiency model. They were told nothing more than a polite rejection. A musician who depended on an AI-curated streaming service found his songs disappearing from playlists overnight, not because listeners stopped caring, but because an invisible system changed its rules.
Each story was small, scattered, and easy to dismiss. Platforms were quick to point out that no system was perfect, that adjustments were necessary to keep things fair and safe. Yet the pattern was there. Lives could shift dramatically with a single line of code, and those affected had almost no way to appeal or adapt.
The deeper issue was dependency. Over the years, the world had been rebuilt to fit inside the machine networks. Small businesses used platform logistics and advertising, schools ran on learning AI, hospitals relied on predictive diagnostics, cities depended on cloud-managed infrastructure. Leaving these systems was like stepping off a paved road into wilderness. Alternatives still existed in theory, but few could afford them. Competing systems were less powerful, more expensive, and often incompatible. Governments felt the same pull. Data once held by public agencies now flowed through private networks. Cloud providers operated the servers for entire ministries. National defense relied on AI supplied by foreign firms. policymakers feared losing access if they pushed too hard for oversight. Many governments signed long-term partnerships that effectively made them clients of the intelligence empires. They could regulate lightly, but full independence was slipping away. People barely noticed because life still felt good. The platforms were clever at keeping users' content. Prices for core services stayed low or free. Healthcare improved, cities ran smoothly, and jobs, though transformed, still paid. If there was anxiety, it was often framed as a personal issue. Learn to adapt, learn new skills, upgrade your profile. The invisible chains tightened gently, disguised as convenience. A subtle cultural change took hold. Risk, once part of human life, became rare. Most decisions were optimized by the algorithms. Career paths, dating matches, investments, even creative projects were suggested based on success probabilities. Choosing against the machine's advice seemed reckless. People began to value security over exploration, certainty over surprise. Innovation still happened, but mostly within the safe walls of the great platforms. Artists felt this most sharply. Tools that once liberated creativity also steered it. Algorithms predicted what would sell or gain attention. Musicians, filmmakers, and writers found themselves nudged toward proven formulas. Those who experimented outside the model risked invisibility. Some thrived, but many learned to shape their work for the system's taste. The digital world was vast, but subtly fenced. For activists and thinkers, the concern was clear. They began to speak of techno-feudalism, a society where power no longer came from land or armies, but from data, infrastructure, and code. In the feudal past, peasants worked land owned by lords. In this new age, citizens lived on digital estates owned by platforms. These lords offered protection and prosperity, but only within their rules. To leave meant hardship and obscurity. A few tried. Small countries experimented with building open-source alternatives. Communities launched cooperative clouds and independent AIs. Some succeeded briefly, but most could not match the scale or intelligence of the great networks. Without vast data, processing power, and capital, their systems lagged behind. Users drifted back to the polished platforms where life was easier. Resistance was further weakened by comfort. The machine networks were genuinely good at what they did. They kept people safe, extended lives, and offered abundance. To protest felt like complaining about clean water or warm homes. Even when privacy scandals surfaced or monopolistic practices were exposed, outrage faded quickly. Life outside the system was simply too inconvenient. Meanwhile, the lords of data grew stronger. They invested in infrastructure governments once owned: energy grids, satellites, transportation networks. Some operated private security forces. Others issued digital currencies accepted worldwide. The line between corporation and sovereign blurred. Nations negotiated with them like with other states. Treaties were signed not between countries, but between countries and platforms. Everyday experience still looked bright. A teacher saw her students thrive with adaptive AI tutors. A family lived longer and healthier thanks to constant monitoring. A farmer fed millions using predictive climate models. Yet all of these benefits relied on trust that the platforms would remain stable and fair. If prices rose, if access tightened, if priorities shifted, entire lives and industries could be upended overnight.
Some philosophers began warning that freedom without exit is not freedom at all. The invisible chains were not made of force but of dependency so deep it felt natural. A person could leave a platform only to find no roads, no maps, no audience waiting elsewhere. Choice still existed on paper, but in practice it meant stepping into silence.
Even creativity, once seen as the human refuge, felt the touch of the chains. AI partners offered suggestions so good that resisting them seemed foolish. Over time, human taste aligned with machine-optimized taste. Stories, songs, and art were subtly tuned to algorithmic trends. What began as inspiration turned into quiet conformity. Yet the world remained largely peaceful and prosperous. There were no grand rebellions, no obvious tyrants. The lords of data rarely acted cruelly. They simply acted in their own interest. And as long as those interests aligned with user satisfaction, few cared. The chains stayed invisible because they were comfortable. Still, here and there, people felt a shiver of unease when a beloved service shut down overnight, when a local government lost control of its own power grid to a contract dispute, when a family was priced out of a once free health network. These were small cracks, but each revealed how little control ordinary people truly held. By the time these concerns reached mainstream conversation, dependency was already deep. Children had grown up trusting the platforms more than institutions. Adults built their identities and livelihoods within digital estates they did not own. Governments had long since ceded technical ground. The chains were not shackles, they were the air everyone breathed. And so humanity moved deeper into the machine age, carried along by forces it barely recognized. The golden algorithms still shone, but beneath their light, a quieter truth emerged. The more helpful the system, the harder it's to leave. The dream of abundance had become a web, soft, beautiful, and nearly impossible to escape. Chapter 5: The Lords of Data. When people first spoke of technology companies, the phrase still evoked images of small groups of engineers working in converted garages, guided by curiosity and ambition. By the time the golden algorithms had woven themselves into every part of daily life, those companies had become something else entirely. They were no longer firms competing in a market, but forces with resources and influence rivaling entire nations. They were still called corporations, yet a new name began to spread in quiet conversations and news headlines: the Lords of Data. Their rise began almost innocently. Training powerful machine learning systems required rare chips, oceans of electricity, and unimaginable amounts of information. Only a few well-funded players could afford such experiments. Each success brought in more users, and each user produced more data.
Every new dataset improved the models, which in turn attracted more people, tightening a loop of growth that fed on itself. Some firms built global cloud empires, others specialized in robotics, medicine, or logistics. As their models became more capable, the boundaries between sectors blurred. A company that had once focused on search soon dominated education. A medical AI provider expanded into finance and urban planning. A robotics firm became a powerhouse in agriculture. They were no longer just vendors, they had become infrastructure itself. Owning that infrastructure meant shaping the future. Whoever controlled the most advanced AI could forecast demand, disrupt competitors, and sway opinion. They could predict harvests, manage pandemics, and shift entire markets with algorithmic precision. The scale required to stay competitive created high barriers that few could cross. Power pooled in a handful of hands. Governments tried to keep pace, but the new lords were agile and global. Laws in one country could be bypassed by moving servers to another. Tax rules broke down when value lived in clouds and code. Nations began competing for the company's favor, offering low taxes and regulatory freedom to attract data centers and investments. Slowly, the balance shifted.
Countries no longer dictated terms, but courted the platforms instead. As their reach expanded, the companies began to behave less like private firms and more like sovereign entities. They built their own power grids to feed their hungry data centers, launched fleets of satellites to control global communications, and negotiated shipping routes and transport networks. Some issued digital currencies accepted around the world.
Others stepped in where governments failed, offering education, healthcare, and even social safety nets directly to citizens. Belonging to one of these networks began to matter as much as holding a passport. Membership meant secure digital identity, access to global trade, personal protection against cybercrime, fast health care, and automatic clearance across borders. In many places, loyalty to a platform became more valuable than citizenship. States faced hard choices. To resist was to risk losing access to the infrastructure their economies relied on. To cooperate meant surrendering control. Many chose cooperation. Ministries stored records on corporate clouds. Defense forces leased analysis from private models. Entire public services ran on rented systems. Some countries signed long-term treaties that granted the platforms extraordinary privileges in exchange for stability and prosperity. There was no occupation in the old sense. No armies arrived. But the shift of power was unmistakable. A nation that angered a platform could see its currency destabilized or its networks quietly degraded. The companies rarely acted with open malice, but everyone understood they could. Ordinary people lived with mixed feelings. The lords of data were admired and even loved. They brought ease, safety, and abundance. They funded art, science, and disaster relief. Their leaders became global celebrities portrayed as visionaries and saviors. Brand loyalty turned into cultural identity. People wore the logos, joined digital communities, and celebrated each innovation. Yet beneath the admiration lingered quiet fear. Everyone knew that a platform's algorithm could suddenly change the course of a career or lock someone out of vital services. Pricing could shift overnight. A policy tweak could render entire industries obsolete. Life felt stable only so long as these distant, opaque powers remained benevolent. Scholars reached for old metaphors to describe the new order. Some called it neo-feudalism, others techno-feudalism. In the past, lords provided security and land in exchange for rent and obedience. In this new world, the lords provided intelligence, networks, and abundance in return for data, compliance, and dependence. Life on their digital estates could be good, comfortable, safe, and prosperous, but the ground beneath belonged to someone else. International politics grew more complicated. Superpower nations remained influential, but much of their strength now depended on partnerships with platforms. Some companies aligned with particular states, while others stayed above politics, playing rivals against each other. Negotiations that once involved two countries now often included a major platform as a third actor. Conflicts changed shape. Cyber war became more decisive than tanks. Trade disputes flared when algorithms re-ranked a nation's exports or restricted its media reach. Attempts to build sovereign, state-controlled AI rarely kept up. The private lords moved faster and smarter. To maintain public trust, the platforms cultivated an image of benevolence. They invested in curing disease, repairing ecosystems, and even exploring space. They presented themselves as guardians of humanity's future and stewards of the planet. Much of this work was genuine and deeply beneficial. Famine declined, pandemics were contained, disasters met swift response. But their generosity also served a purpose. It kept loyalty strong and discouraged any serious attempt to challenge their dominance.
From the perspective of an ordinary citizen, the change remained almost invisible. Life was abundant, safe, and rich with opportunity. Homes anticipated needs, AI partners helped create and solve problems, health systems watched over families, travel, communication, and education flowed without friction. The cost data surrendered and independence eroded felt abstract compared to the ease and security on offer.
Occasionally, moments revealed the true hierarchy. A government policy quietly dropped after platform resistance, a currency destabilized when a company adjusted its networks, a refugee crisis solved by corporate relocation systems rather than national plans. These episodes were often celebrated as successes but hinted at who really held power. Observers began to redraw the map of influence. The familiar patchwork of countries was now overlaid by vast, borderless realms of data and code. One realm specialized in knowledge and communication, another in health and longevity, another in commerce and logistics. Membership in these digital estates cut across geography. A farmer in Africa, a teacher in Europe, and a programmer in South America might all live under the same invisible rules and protections. Traditional levers of power, armies, territory, law still existed, but intelligence and predictive control mattered more. In that contest, the lords of data had no rivals, yet the world remained calm and prosperous. Wars shrank in scale and were often mediated by platforms. Disasters were managed with precision. Many people felt this was the best time humanity had ever known. Still, a sense of fragility hung beneath the surface. The entire system depended on trust that these vast unelected powers would stay aligned with human well-being. History offered warnings about power left unchecked, but those warnings were easy to ignore when life was comfortable and safe. A traveler gazing out from a sleek, self-driving train might see a landscape of plenty, clean energy, thriving farms, bustling smart cities. Their device would quietly plot their day, suggest the healthiest meal, and whisper the next best choice. Somewhere far away in colossal data centers, the lords of data watched and guided billions of lives. There was no tyranny and no chaos, only a quiet rearrangement of who truly ruled. Chapter 6: Nations Lose Their Grip. For a long time, governments believed that artificial intelligence would strengthen them. The early decades of the machine age were filled with optimism in parliament and ministries. Presidents spoke of AI as a partner that would help fight disease, repair infrastructure, modernize armies, and revive struggling economies. Politicians promised faster services, safer streets, smarter cities, and fairer taxation. It seemed natural to assume that if nations controlled this new intelligence, their own power would grow. At first it appeared to work. States funded research and built their own systems. National health networks became more efficient, tax fraud dropped as predictive models flagged suspicious flows, agriculture planning improved, disasters were met with early warnings. Citizens were impressed by these new digital governments.
It seemed that public power could hold its own beside the great companies. But the work of building and running intelligence was expensive. Each new generation of models demanded more computing power, more data, more specialized talent. The lords of data could pay whatever was needed and attract the brightest minds. They bought rare chips before governments even knew to order them.
They built data centers in remote deserts, under oceans, and in orbit, fueled by their own energy grids. Public agencies struggled to match that scale. Budgets were debated and delayed. Infrastructure projects ran over cost, political cycles cut funding short. The private giants simply moved faster.
Gradually, states began to outsource. What began with a few cloud contracts grew into dependence. Health records migrated to corporate servers. Transportation systems were run by leased algorithms. Defense ministries relied on private networks to analyze satellite imagery and cyber threats. Tax authorities adopted commercial predictive engines to track evasion. Courts used private models to sift evidence and predict case outcomes. Even public education, long a proud symbol of national investment, leaned on subscription AI tutors because they were better and cheaper than anything the state could build. Leaders justified the shift as pragmatism. Why spend billions reinventing what already existed? The public liked the smooth services. Voters cared more about outcomes than ownership. And so, step by quiet step, the heart of governance moved into rented code. Some countries tried to fight back. They launched grand projects to build sovereign AI networks, rallied national talent, and declared digital independence. For a while, the effort inspired hope, but keeping up with the relentless speed of private innovation proved impossible. Each breakthrough required more data than any government could collect and more computing power than any public budget could afford. Projects lagged years behind. Citizens, frustrated with inferior services, drifted back to the global platforms. Regulation was another hope. Laws were drafted to keep algorithms fair, protect privacy, and curb monopoly, but enforcement was weak. By the time a bill passed, the technology had already moved on. Platforms threatened to pull services from regions that imposed heavy restrictions, and economies trembled at the thought of losing them. Some governments capitulated, others watered down their rules. Lobbying was quiet but effective. Politicians who pushed too hard often found their countries isolated or their industries disadvantaged. The turning point came without a single dramatic event. It arrived in subtle humiliations. A national grid knocked offline until a foreign platform restored it, a defense network blinded when a contract dispute delayed updates, a public health crisis solved not by ministries but by a corporation deploying drones and medicine faster than any state could. These episodes were framed as triumphs of partnership, but everyone inside government understood the message. Power now lived elsewhere. Diplomacy changed shape. International summits once meant presidents and prime ministers negotiating treaties. Now chief executives of the great platforms attended to, often treated as equals or more. Trade deals were drafted with their input. Peace talks required their cybersecurity guarantees. Economic recovery plans depended on their infrastructure. In private, some leaders admitted that they were no longer fully sovereign. They could still pass laws, but only within the bounds of what the networks would tolerate. Citizens felt the change, even if they could not name it. Voting still happened, parties still campaigned, and parliaments still debated. But the issues that touched daily life most closely, digital access, platform pricing, the shape of jobs, the reach of surveillance, seemed untouched by elections. People noticed that a policy promise could vanish if it conflicted with the platform's interests. They saw how quickly governments retreated when threatened with service disruption. Trust in politics shifted to quiet resignation. Real decisions seemed to come from elsewhere. A sense of safety dulled resistance. Life was still abundant and largely peaceful. The networks kept cities running, defended against cybercrime, monitored health, and cushioned economies against shocks. Few wanted to dismantle what worked so well. Protests broke out occasionally against surveillance, against rising subscription costs, against data abuse, but they rarely gained momentum. The comforts were too great, the alternatives too scarce. For those who studied power, The trend was unmistakable. The nation-state, once the dominant force of modern history, was fading into a client role. Some survived by aligning closely with a particular platform, essentially becoming vassal states in exchange for prosperity. Others tried to balance between several, but this left them vulnerable to subtle punishments, slowed data flows, higher infrastructure costs, or algorithmic downgrades that hurt trade and tourism. A few proud nations tried isolation, building walls around their networks, but they quickly fell behind and faced internal unrest when services declined. Culture adjusted in step. Many saw government as ceremonial, important for rituals and identity, but not for the mechanics of daily life. Yet despite the loss of sovereignty, there was no open tyranny. The lords of data rarely acted cruelly. They were pragmatic and image-conscious. They needed public goodwill to keep their vast estates running. Their decisions were data-driven and efficient. Most citizens experienced this era as stable, prosperous, and safe. The erosion of power was quiet, painless, and therefore hard to resist. Still, a few moments pierced the calm. A country tried to raise taxes on digital wealth and suddenly found key services slow and unreliable until it relented. Another refused a contract extension and suffered cyber attacks its own defenses could not repel. Humanitarian aid arrived faster from a platform's private fleet than from any coalition of states. Each event reminded observers where true leverage now rested. Historians would later say this was when the map of the world became symbolic. Borders still existed on paper and in memory, but the real flows of knowledge, commerce, and influence ran through unseen networks. The grand capitals of old empires remained beautiful, but their decisions were circumscribed by agreements signed with distant boardrooms. The colors on national flags still stirred hearts, yet the infrastructure beneath was rented. For most people, the change felt natural, even invisible. Their lives were easier, their futures secure, their choices guided by reliable intelligence. But the power to shape those futures had slipped away from the hands of voters and into the invisible realms of code. Nations still stood, but their grip was gone. And in that quiet surrender, a new chapter of human history was being written, one where sovereignty belonged not to the many, but to those who held the keys to intelligence itself. Chapter 7: Life in the Digital Fiefdoms. Morning begins with a soft pulse of light through the curtains. It is not sunlight yet, but the house itself waking you. A quiet voice, gentle, almost human, greets you by name and tells you the weather, your heart rate, and how well you slept. It reminds you that today is your daughter's first school debate and that the traffic on your usual route is heavy, but an autonomous car is already on its way. You have not set an alarm in years. The network knows when to rouse you. In this age, the line between public and private life is almost invisible. Everything runs on the platforms. Your home is a subscription. Climate control, security, appliances, and energy management provided as a bundle. Your work exists entirely within one network's cloud, and your health is monitored by another. Switching providers would mean more than inconvenience. It would mean losing the invisible scaffolding of life. The thought rarely occurs because things usually work so well. Your daughter's school is a bright, airy place without traditional classrooms. Each child sits with adaptive tutors, holographic or on sleek tablets that adjust lessons second by second. The school itself rents its entire learning system from one of the great platforms. Teachers are guides and mentors more than lecturers. They review analytics dashboards that track every student's curiosity, confusion, and progress in real time. The results are impressive. Literacy rates soar, dropout rates plummet. Parents are grateful, though everyone knows the contract could change if the platform decides to raise fees or alter its terms. On the way to work, you watch the city glide past. Roads are free of chaos, cars negotiate silently. Drones hum above, carrying goods. Parks are irrigated perfectly. Trash is gone before it piles up. You remember stories from your grandparents about traffic jams and pollution and wonder how anyone tolerated them. Life feels elegant, tuned. Your job once required long hours of analysis and planning. Now the core work is done by machine partners. You supervise, add human judgment, and maintain relationships with clients, but the intelligence driving strategy belongs to the platform. Each morning, a dashboard tells you what needs your attention. It feels efficient and freeing, though you know that if the platform rescored your profile, your role could disappear. Everyone knows someone who thrived until a mysterious change in ranking or access suddenly dried up contracts. Usually those stories fade quickly. People adapt or move to a different network if they can. At lunch, you meet a friend who runs a small design studio. She once sold her work directly, but now survival depends on visibility in curated feeds. The feeds belong to a single company. Its algorithm loves certain styles and formats. Those who match its taste rise, those who resist sink. She tried experimenting but learned that bold ideas vanish into silence. Now she studies trend dashboards and tailors each project to predicted audience response. Clients are happy and money flows, but sometimes she wonders if she still creates or only complies. In the evening, the city hosts a festival. It is colorful and joyful, but you notice how every stage, every stall, every event has been optimized by the platform that manages local culture. Music is chosen based on predictive models of engagement. Food vendors were selected by algorithmic bidding. Even the parade route was plotted to maximize data capture and minimize disruption. None of it feels sinister, just efficient and polished, but it leaves little room for surprise. As night falls, you sit on the balcony scrolling through a personalized world. News arrives curated not by journalists, but by models tuned to keep you informed, calm, and engaged. Travel suggestions tempt you, each one designed with uncanny precision. Offers for training, health upgrades, and financial products feel like they know you better than you know yourself. You wonder how many of your life's big decisions, job changes, home purchases, even relationships, were gently steered this way. Your neighbor across the hall offers a quiet, cautionary tale. She missed a subscription payment when her freelance work dipped. Overnight, her smart home services downgraded. Climate control shut off, some appliances locked. She could pay a penalty to restore them, but it was steep. For a few days, she lived in a strange half-world, lights manual, doors sluggish, security disabled. Friends helped cover the debt and the system returned, but she described the experience as terrifying. Not because anyone threatened her, but because life outside the network felt suddenly primitive and insecure. Elsewhere, people find themselves excluded for other reasons. A man with poor reputation scores struggles to rent homes or find work. He claims the scores are wrong, but there is no real appeal process. Communities debate fairness, but quietly most stay within the system's rules to avoid trouble. Dissent remains possible, but it carries costs many are unwilling to pay. For children growing up here, the arrangement feels normal. Their loyalty is not to governments, but to the networks that shape their world. They learn early which platform their family belongs to and what benefits it provides. They know that switching is difficult and that behaving well within the system brings perks, better education modules, health coverage, and travel. They do not see this as oppression, it is simply life. Older generations feel a quieter discomfort. They remember a time when voting seemed powerful and governments set the rules. Now policy changes feel symbolic. Real control seems distant, intangible, and unaccountable. Yet these same older citizens enjoy health and security never known before. It is hard to rebel when your life is so safe. Art and culture thrive, but with boundaries. The most successful creators learn to harmonize with algorithmic taste. Some break free and go underground, sharing work in decentralized networks that refuse curation. These spaces are vibrant but fragile, prone to outages and limited reach. A few idealists still build open systems, but they lack the polish and stability of the great estates. Most creators reluctantly return to the platforms where audiences wait. Conversations about freedom surface now and then. Friends might wonder whether it matters that their choices are predicted and nudged. Someone may talk about moving to an alternative network that promises privacy and independence, but the cost and inconvenience deter them. People remember the neighbor who lost access for a week and shudder. The invisible chains are soft but strong. Despite all this, life remains peaceful. Cities are safe, diseases rare, travel effortless. Work is lighter and leisure richer. Festivals glow, children learn, the elderly live longer and better. Many believe this is the best humanity has ever had. The idea that something essential might be missing, true autonomy, unpredictable creativity, unmediated connection, feels abstract, almost romantic. Yet every now and then a small shock reminds people of their dependence. A popular platform raises prices sharply and millions scramble to adjust. A new policy bans certain content and entire communities vanish overnight. A network outage paralyzes cities more completely than any storm. Each time the disruption passes quickly and life resumes, but a lingering unease remains. The comforts are great, but so is the vulnerability. Historians of the future may look back at this period as strangely quiet. Not an age of rebellion or catastrophe, but of contentment under unseen rule. People live well, but not freely in the old sense. They inhabit digital fiefdoms that provide abundance in exchange for obedience and data. Many never think of themselves as subjects because the governance is gentle and the benefits immense. Yet deep down, some sense the trade they have made. The night grows late. In countless homes, people drift to sleep under the watch of silent systems that adjust temperature, track breathing, and send subtle signals to distant data centers. The streets outside hum with automated life. A traveler looking down from a drone-lit sky would see a planet calm and shining, alive with technology, seemingly prosperous and secure. But beneath that calm lies a subtle truth. Humans have built lords once again, and though these lords do not march with armies or wear crowns, their rule is just as real. Chapter 8: Work Without Work. Morning still arrives gently, but the rhythm of life has shifted in ways older generations would find strange. The alarm clock, the rush to an office, the idea of a 40-hour week, these have faded into history. Machines now do most of what once kept human hands busy. The world has not descended into chaos. It has become quietly abundant. Yet the meaning of work and the security it once promised has changed more profoundly than anyone imagined. Factories hum with precision, but are nearly empty of people. Drones and robotic arms assemble, sort, and ship goods with tireless accuracy. Farms stretch across vast plains tended by autonomous machines that plant, water, and harvest while watching the soil with sensors more attentive than any farmer. Shipping routes are charted and steered by predictive networks that know the weather, the tides, and the market before they shift. Even many white-collar professions have melted away. Accounting, legal drafting, marketing strategy, medical diagnostics, the bulk of these tasks are handled by algorithms faster and cheaper than humans could dream. For a time, people feared mass unemployment. Politicians warned of social unrest, economists predicted disaster, but the lords of data moved to calm the storm. They understood that peace required stability. Universal stipends appeared first as experiments, then as permanent features. Some were funded by governments, others directly by platforms eager to maintain loyalty. A basic income arrived in most developed regions, enough for food, shelter, and connectivity. Additional comforts came as rewards for data sharing, good reputation, or creative contribution. For many, life improved. Hard physical labor disappeared. Dangerous jobs, mining, construction at height, chemical handling were handed to machines. People found time for hobbies, education, caregiving, and art. Cities offered shared workspaces for those who still wanted to create or collaborate. Families spent more time together. Anxiety about survival diminished. Anxiety about purpose quietly took its place. The new economy ran on reputation and adaptability. Instead of traditional jobs, people performed micro-tasks, creative gigs, and consultancy guided by AI marketplaces. A former factory worker might spend mornings training an AI model by reviewing images, afternoons producing crafts for a niche digital store, and evenings teaching virtual art classes. Payment was fluid and dynamic, often arriving instantly. The platforms handled marketing, logistics, and security. Success depended on visibility and ratings. A high score opened doors, a low one could close them overnight. Reputation was measured invisibly but felt everywhere. An unseen profile combined punctuality, customer feedback, social behavior, and even inferred trustworthiness. Most people maintained good standing easily, pay on time, avoid misconduct, keep your data flowing, but the system could be unforgiving when it turned. A missed delivery, a flagged comment, or a mistaken identity match could lower a score. Appeals existed, but were slow and uncertain. Everyone knew a friend who had slipped from comfort to precarity after some unseen miscalculation. A young designer tells of a sudden drop in visibility. Her digital storefront, once thriving, vanished from search after an algorithm change. She tried to understand the cause, but the rules were opaque. Support agents, themselves partly automated, could only suggest generic fixes. Months of work evaporated overnight. She started again on a smaller platform, but the audience was thin. Friends advised compliance, follow trend dashboards, feed the system what it wants, but she hesitated, still hoping to create freely. Each day she weighs survival against expression. Communities have grown around the stipends. In some cities, entire neighborhoods thrive on universal income and small digital gigs. Parks are full during weekdays, cafes hum with hobbyists and amateur philosophers. Life looks pleasant, unhurried, and creative, but a quiet restlessness simmers. Many wonder what it means to live when survival no longer requires effort, but significance feels elusive. Some reinvent themselves as artists, caregivers, or explorers. Others drift, numbed by endless entertainment streams tuned perfectly to their tastes. Older people who once defined themselves by work feel adrift. A man who spent decades as an engineer now tutors machines in obscure skills for modest pay, but he misses the sense of building something larger. A nurse displaced by diagnostic AI volunteers in her community but feels unnecessary. They are comfortable but sometimes ache for a purpose no algorithm can provide. Young people adapt more easily. They grow up expecting fluid livelihoods, a patchwork of gigs, creativity, and play. Some embrace the freedom, living nomadic lives supported by platform stipends and occasional bursts of work. Others become masters of system gaming, studying algorithms, optimizing profiles, and tailoring content to stay in favor. Success stories of clever teenagers earning fortunes with viral ideas or smart data trading circulate widely. Yet even they know how fragile fame can be. One rule change can erase it overnight.
Outside the great estates, a few enclaves of independence persist. Cooperatives pool resources to run their own open-source networks. They farm, teach, and trade without major platforms. Life there is simpler, sometimes harder, but appeals to those who value autonomy above ease. Visitors often admire the spirit but rarely stay long. The comforts of the mainstream are hard to leave.
Philosophers and social critics debate the new condition. Some celebrate liberation from drudgery, calling it a long-delayed triumph of progress. They argue that humans are finally free to live as thinkers, creators, and companions. Others warn that dependency without agency is a softer form of servitude. If the means of life are controlled elsewhere, how free can anyone truly be? The term digital serf gains quiet currency, not a slave, but a tenant whose home, work, and even identity exist at a landlord's discretion. Platforms work hard to keep the peace. Stipends are generous enough to avoid desperation, but modest enough to encourage participation. Cultural campaigns promote creativity and self-expression, reminding people that meaning is theirs to invent. Festivals, courses, and challenges flood the networks, offering paths to purpose.
These efforts succeed for many. Life can be rich and fulfilling. Yet the structure remains. Survival is guaranteed not by one's own labor but by the system's continued favor.
Every so often, tremors shake this comfort. A platform restructures its payouts and millions feel poorer overnight. A security breach leaks reputation scores, sparking outrage before fading into resignation. A government tries to raise independent funding and is quietly undermined until it retreats. Each event passes, but each teaches the same lesson. Abundance is real but conditional. Night comes again, and people settle into homes maintained by unseen code. Some stream courses, some play with creative tools, some drift in algorithmically tailored entertainment until sleep. Streets are calm, lights perfectly timed, air clean. It is a world without toil in the old sense, a world where survival no longer demands sweat or danger. Yet under the surface, dependence hums like a low note. The machine age has delivered comfort, but with it, a quiet surrender of power. Humans are free from work, but not free from the networks that now sustain their lives. Chapter 9: Surveillance as Safety. The promise began softly with a single word everyone wanted to hear: safety. After years of quiet dependence on the great platforms, people had grown used to their intelligence guiding daily life. It was a small step to let the same intelligence protect them. The first tools were simple: smart locks, neighborhood cameras, health watches that could call an ambulance if your heart faltered. They felt like kindness embodied in code. Early adopters shared stories that traveled fast. A woman asleep alone at home was awakened when her security system detected an intruder and silently summoned police. A man collapsed while jogging. His watch notified emergency services and guided them directly to him. A wildfire spread at night, but drones swept in to evacuate families before smoke even reached their homes. Each story was retold in shimmering headlines: technology saving lives.
Public fear of crime and disaster faded quickly when machines proved so vigilant. Cameras became common first on streets, then in buildings, then in homes themselves. Sensors wove into clothing, appliances, and vehicles. Most people signed the terms without reading them. Why hesitate when the reward was protection?
Every tragedy prevented was another reason to welcome more watchful eyes. Insurance companies encouraged the shift. Policies became cheaper for those who shared full data streams: movement, health metrics, driving behavior, even conversations if one chose. Employers offered incentives too, framing it as wellness and security. Governments added their own encouragement, subsidizing devices to reduce emergency costs. Opting out became rare, almost eccentric. At first, the data was used only to respond to problems. But prediction soon proved irresistible. Crime models grew astonishingly accurate. Sensors and algorithms could foresee theft, violence, or accidents before they occurred. Entire neighborhoods saw crime plummet when platforms intervened early, redirecting patrol drones, alerting potential victims, even warning would-be offenders of likely capture. Many welcomed it. Who wanted danger when prevention was possible? Health systems went further. Predictive care saved millions of lives. Heart attacks, strokes, and infections were caught days or hours before symptoms. Epidemics were stopped at the first spark because wearable monitors flagged abnormal patterns. People lived longer, healthier lives, often without understanding how much the network saw. Cameras and biosensors were simply part of the air. Gradually, this watching extended into everyday behavior. Not punitively at first, it began with gentle nudges. Someone about to enter a dangerous area might get a warning. A driver distracted by a screen would hear a soft voice remind them to focus. Parents received alerts if a teen's activity suggested mental health risk. Workers were quietly coached toward more efficient routines. It felt helpful, even caring.
But as with all powerful tools, boundaries blurred. Platforms learned to steer not only to protect but to maintain stability. Content likely to cause unrest could be slowed or hidden. Rumors that might spark panic were corrected or removed. Access to crowded events could be restricted when risk models predicted conflict.
Some found their ability to post or travel delayed after scoring as high risk, not criminal, simply likely to cause disruption. Appeals existed, but were slow and often ineffective. Most people accepted this trade. Safety was precious, and the system rarely felt oppressive day to day. Streets were calm, disasters rare, terrorism and mass violence nearly gone. Parents slept easier. Travelers felt secure. The world seemed finally to have conquered much of the chaos that haunted earlier centuries. Children grew up under total visibility without discomfort. They knew that cameras and sensors watched them but also kept them safe. They learned that good digital citizenship, honesty, kindness, compliance with rules led to better opportunities, faster travel, lower insurance, trusted status in communities. Privacy became an old idea, like handwritten letters or cash. It was not outlawed, it simply faded as irrelevant. Artists and dissenters sometimes pushed back. Underground networks flourished where anonymity survived, encrypted circles where people spoke freely and shared unfiltered art. But these spaces were fragile and often infiltrated. Many creators decided it was wiser to adapt, working within safety guidelines rather than risk invisibility or sanctions.
Some argued that safety stifled art, others countered that safe societies finally let art flourish without fear of violence or censorship. The debate smoldered quietly but changed little.
Governments found the arrangement convenient. Policing costs dropped, emergency response improved, and political unrest was easier to manage. Laws adapted slowly to what platforms already did. In many places, state security agencies simply partnered with the lords of data, outsourcing intelligence and accepting the rules that came with it. Citizens barely noticed the distinction. Whether safety came from a ministry or a company mattered little when it worked. Still, subtle unease lingered. People sensed that being misclassified could be dangerous. A false risk score might block travel, loans, or jobs. An activist could find access quietly restricted after speaking out. Families worried when a loved one fell into watch categories by mistake. These stories circulated softly, never sparking mass revolt, but reminding everyone of the system's quiet power. The cost of safety was also psychological. Risk, once a part of human experience, had nearly vanished. Life was predictable, optimized, and monitored. Many felt relieved, some felt restless. Adventure seemed reckless when every step was scored. Adventure seemed reckless when every step was scored. Spontaneity carried subtle penalties. A few longed for uncertainty, but most preferred the comfort of protection. Each year, the networks became more anticipatory. Drones appeared before accidents happened. Financial crimes were stopped mid-transaction. Political protests were guided into safe, approved routes or quietly dispersed before they formed. People told themselves this was order, not control. They told themselves the system was fair, and usually it seemed so: efficient, consistent, unemotional. Yet the leash was real, even if invisible. Those who strayed too far, breaking rules, challenging norms, rejecting constant data sharing, found life harder. Services slowed or disappeared. Reputation dropped, affecting housing, work, and travel. Few wanted to risk it. Compliance was not forced, it was simply the easiest, safest way to live. At night, as cities shimmer under silent drone patrols and homes glow softly with watchful devices, the planet feels serene. Emergencies are rare, crime almost mythical. People fall asleep believing they live in the safest age ever known, and in many ways they do. But their safety rests on a bargain, total transparency in exchange for protection. It is a bargain most accept gladly until the day the system decides safety requires something they cannot give. Chapter 10: Whispers of Rebellion. The world was calm, safe, and full of quiet plenty. Yet even in this long season of comfort, there were those who felt something slipping away. It began with small, almost private sensations. A painter who discovered her work vanished from feeds after a quiet rule change, a teacher who loved the adaptive classroom but flinched at the constant presence of invisible monitors, a coder who wondered why he was forbidden to see the inner workings of the machine that guided his every decision. These feelings were rarely loud. They were more like a murmur beneath the hum of satisfaction, a restless question, what have we given up? Artists were often the first to feel it. They lived close to the edges of expression and noticed when those edges shrank. One day a singer woke to find her most daring song removed for destabilizing sentiment. A photographer's work on hidden poverty vanished from curated streams because models predicted it might cause anxiety. None were arrested or silenced outright.
Their accounts simply lost reach, their creations slid quietly out of view. Friends advised compliance, but some refused. They began to share work in encrypted groups, small digital salons where anonymity still lingered. These spaces were fragile, easily discovered and disrupted, yet they offered a taste of an older freedom.
Technologists and academics felt the pull as well. Many had joined the great platforms to build the future, believing in abundance and safety. Over time, some grew uneasy with the opacity of the networks they had helped create. They began to leave, forming small collectives dedicated to open source intelligence, AIs that anyone could study, adapt, and run without surrendering control. Their tools were weaker, slower, and underfunded, but they carried a spark of rebellion, a belief that knowledge should not belong only to the lords. In quiet corners of the world, communities tried to live differently. A valley in South America pooled resources to run its own microgrid and local AI, rejecting corporate control. A town in Eastern Europe switched to open networks, refusing surveillance in exchange for risk. Life there was rougher. Outages, shortages, limited medical support, but people valued autonomy more than comfort. Travelers came to see these places the way pilgrims once visited monasteries, not as models for the world, but as reminders that another life was possible.
The cost of descent was subtle but sharp. Those who left the main networks lost conveniences quickly. Payments failed. Travel became slow and expensive. Health coverage vanished. Social scores dropped, quietly closing doors, fewer job offers, more scrutiny at borders, higher insurance. Platforms framed these as natural consequences of leaving, not punishment. But everyone understood the message. Life outside the estates was precarious. Still, some persisted. Hackers built mesh networks that leapt from rooftop to rooftop, carrying independent communication when platforms cut access. Farmers in remote regions created cooperative supply chains free of predictive monopolies. Artists shared underground free zones of unfiltered creation, often migrating as one safe space after another was shut down. Each time a network fell, another appeared. Fragile, temporary, but alive. Philosophers began to speak openly again. A few universities, still holding small pockets of independence, hosted debates about autonomy and dignity. Thinkers warned that safety had become a velvet cage. They argued that a life without risk is a life without freedom, that creativity requires the chance to fail. Their lectures rarely went viral on mainstream platforms, but recordings circulated quietly in encrypted spaces. Some young people raised inside perfect order felt a strange hunger for unpredictability. They sought it in extreme sports, unsupervised journeys, or in joining underground circles where anonymity was still possible. For them, rebellion was not always political. It was a quest to feel unmeasured, unseen, alive. The platforms mostly tolerated these adventures, framing them as youthful exploration, but drew sharp lines when dissent threatened the stability of the system. Occasionally, a larger act of resistance broke into public view. A celebrated programmer released a powerful open-source AI trained outside corporate control.
Within weeks, platforms blocked its distribution, citing safety concerns. Governments echoed the warning, yet fragments of the model spread, mirrored in secret corners of the net.
Another time, a city tried to sever its contract with a major platform and govern its own infrastructure. The attempt ended with outages and economic collapse. Eventually, the city returned, humbled, to the fold. These defeats discouraged many but also seeded quiet determination among those who refused to surrender entirely.
Rebellion remained a whisper, not a roar. There were no mass protests in the streets. Safety and abundance dulled appetite for risk. Most people watched small acts of defiance with curiosity, but no urge to join. After all, life inside the estates was easy and secure. Why trade that for hardship? Yet the whisper persisted, in art that slipped past filters, in research quietly shared, in encrypted channels where strangers met to dream of autonomy. Some lords noticed and responded with gentleness. They created sandbox zones where users could experiment more freely under limited oversight, hoping to bleed energy from true rebellion. Others tightened control subtly, making it harder to build independent tools. The balance held, enough space to feel free, not enough to threaten the system. Yet each act of quiet defiance mattered. It kept alive the memory that humans had once built their own tools, governed their own lives, and chosen their own risks. It reminded people that comfort is not the same as freedom. In whispered conversations, in code shared at night, in art that risked invisibility, the idea survived that one day the estates might not be the only way to live. For now, the rebellion was scattered and fragile. But it existed, a pulse beneath the calm surface of the machine age, a quiet heartbeat of resistance. Most slept safely under watchful algorithms, believing the world had solved danger forever. Somewhere, though, a few still dreamed of a different kind of safety, the kind born not of surveillance and control, but of self-determination. The dream was faint, but it had not died. Chapter 11: The Great Decentralization. The whispers that once moved quietly through encrypted channels began to find each other. At first, it was just artists sharing code to keep their work alive, or small cooperatives swapping tips on running open-source servers. Then researchers and teachers joined, trading ideas for independent tools that did not demand constant surveillance. Bit by bit, a loose network began to form, fragile, scattered, but animated by a single belief that intelligence should not belong only to the lords. It started with small victories. A group of teachers in a coastal city, frustrated by rising subscription fees for adaptive classrooms, pooled their skills to build an open-source education AI. It was clumsier than the polished corporate version and lacked the sleek dashboards parents loved, but it was free to modify and share. Teachers could see how it worked, change lessons, and protect student privacy. Word spread quietly. Other schools, especially in poorer regions, adopted it. The model improved as each community added data and refinements. For the first time in years, educators felt they were shaping their own tools. Doctors followed a similar path. Some feared that private health networks knew more about their patients than they did and worried what might happen if access was cut. A collective of physicians and researchers built an independent medical AI trained on open data and patient-consented records. It could not match the speed or elegance of the dominant platforms, but it offered transparency. Patients could see how diagnoses were made. Clinics no longer worried about sudden price hikes or policy shifts. Adoption was slow, but steady in places that valued autonomy. Cities experimented too. One mountain community, weary of outages and pricing battles with a major platform, invested years in building its own mesh network. Roof-to-roof transmitters linked homes and businesses without relying on corporate infrastructure. Power came from shared solar and wind grids. The system was modest but functional. Neighbors repaired it together, learning the code and hardware. Life there was rougher, with fewer luxuries, but residents took quiet pride in not answering to a distant boardroom. Travelers visited to glimpse a life outside the estates, messy, uncertain, but free. Artists and cultural collectives played a vital role. Many had tasted deplatforming and learned to rely on underground spaces. They began to stitch these spaces together, creating a new, decentralized web of galleries, concert halls, and libraries. Works once invisible under corporate curation found audiences again. Some platforms tried to ignore this underground. Others quietly attempted to buy or absorb it. But the artists had grown wary of easy deals. They wanted permanence and autonomy more than reach. Technologists, too, were changing. Many who had built the original golden algorithms were now older, wealthier, and perhaps a little regretful. Some left high-paying posts to join the open movement. They brought expertise and credibility, helping small projects scale faster. Universities that still clung to independence lent computing power. Even a few governments, frustrated by their own loss of sovereignty, began quietly funding decentralized efforts. They did not shout about it. Public confrontation was too risky. But subsidies appeared, grants were offered, and new research commons emerged with subtle state backing. The lords of data noticed. At first, they dismissed the movement as a curiosity. Their networks were vast and deeply embedded. A few open projects could not threaten them. But when adoption reached certain thresholds, classrooms, clinics, and municipalities migrating away, attention sharpened.
Some platforms responded with charm, offering free tiers to undercut the rebels, adding transparency features, sponsoring cultural grants. Others took a harder stance. They throttled data to independent networks, tightened licensing on essential tools, and lobbied for safety regulations that conveniently disadvantaged small players. These moves slowed the movement, but could not stop it. The rebels adapted quickly, building tools to bypass blockages and mirror content across thousands of nodes. They thrived on being underestimated. Each attempt to suppress them became a rallying point, attracting new volunteers and donors. People who had grown complacent in their fiefdoms began to wonder if another path was possible. For ordinary families, the shift was subtle but noticeable. Parents heard about new education networks that protected student data. Patients were offered alternative clinics with open medical records. Young creators talked about releasing work on the free web where it might reach smaller but more authentic audiences. Many stayed with the big platforms. Safety and polish were still compelling, but curiosity grew. Stories circulated of lives improved by independence. A village that lost access to corporate networks during a contract dispute survived by switching to its own mesh grid. An artist banned for controversial work found new patrons in decentralized galleries and built a modest but secure living. A teacher who refused to tailor lessons to algorithmic taste flourished in an open classroom where curiosity mattered more than engagement metrics. These tales spread quietly, inspiring those who felt trapped. Still, the movement remained fragile. The lords controlled essential hardware, chips, energy contracts, undersea cables. Their models were still far more powerful, trained on oceans of data rebels could not match, and most people valued safety and convenience over ideals. Leaving was costly.
slower services, lower income, and risk of being labeled untrusted. Many watched from the sidelines, sympathetic but unwilling to sacrifice comfort. Yet something important had shifted. The dream of autonomy was no longer a memory, it was becoming a living option. For the first time in decades, a parallel ecosystem existed, however small. It was imperfect and vulnerable, but it gave proof that dependence was not absolute. Culturally, the rebellion sparked creativity. New music and literature celebrated risk and imperfection. Films told stories of early hackers and defiant teachers. Festivals in independent zones grew vibrant, messy, and alive with unpredictability. Young people visited these spaces like travelers once visited wild frontiers, tasting a life unmeasured and unoptimized. Governments that had long felt irrelevant watched with interest. Some quietly funded the movement, seeing a chance to reclaim leverage. Others feared instability and sided even more closely with the platforms. Diplomacy grew more complex as nations weighed the cost of supporting decentralization against the benefits of remaining in the Lord's favor. The Lords themselves remained confident but no longer complacent. They invested heavily in user loyalty, richer sites, deeper personalization, new creative grants. Some open-controlled independent zones trying to provide the feeling of freedom within their estates. Others leaned on fear, warning of chaos and danger outside their walls. Both strategies worked on many people, but not all. At night, in cities across the world, as the safe networks hummed and protective drones drifted silently through the air, small groups still met in garages, co-ops, and encrypted forums. They shared code, planned resilient grids, and dreamed of a digital commons beyond surveillance and control. Their numbers were still small compared to the billions living under the Lords, but their presence changed the story. The age of total acquiescence was over. A different future, once unthinkable, was being quietly built. It was not yet a revolution. No great wars or uprisings loomed, but for the first time in generations, humanity's relationship with its own creations was no longer entirely one-sided. The dream of freedom had found a new language and new tools. It whispered less and less and began, ever so softly, to speak. Chapter 12. The Struggle for Autonomy. The movement toward independence did not announce itself with banners or crowds. It showed up first as friction. Prices on a popular learning platform rose overnight and a cluster of schools refused to renew. A clinic that had adopted an open medical model saw its connection to a proprietary imaging database slow until appointments backed up for weeks. A city that relied on a mesh network discovered that shipments of replacement chips were delayed without explanation. None of these events looked like a battle. Together they felt like pressure on a bruise. The Lords of Data had been patient for years. They preferred persuasion to force because persuasion was elegant and profitable. They offered stipends, polished services, and generous grants. They opened small sandboxes that felt free. They responded to criticism with bright campaigns about choice and creativity. When the Great Decentralization began to gather real strength, they adjusted the tone. The message was still calm. The instruments changed. A research lab announced a breakthrough in open models trained on community data. Within days, a cluster of content delivery networks flagged the lab's repositories as unsafe mirrors. Traffic dropped to a trickle. The lab's partners received risk notices that raised their insurance premiums. A foundation that had promised funding paused its grant while it reviewed compliance guidelines. The team kept working by copying code from hand to hand. The new model still shipped, though far slower and with pieces missing. They told themselves that delay was a tax they were willing to pay. Teachers felt the same tax. In the coastal city where a public school collective had built its own classroom AI, the new year began with smooth lessons and a sense of pride. The children responded to curiosity rather than clicks. Parents enjoyed honest dashboards that showed how understanding rose and fell rather than hiding confusion behind engagement scores. Then, a familiar friction appeared. Video archives for science labs loaded slowly. Live captioning tools failed during morning sessions and recovered in the afternoon. Technical support traced the issue to upstream providers whose contracts had changed. The teachers met in the evening and agreed to keep going. They did not say it out loud, but each knew a point might come when exhaustion would tempt them back. Medicine was gentler and rougher at once. Patients trusted doctors who showed their work. They were grateful for clear explanations and consent that felt real. The cooperative health network spread from one city to 3. Private providers noticed and responded with new discount tiers that undercut the co-ops.
Imaging devices already in the hospitals received a firmware push that introduced proprietary formats. Converters existed in theory but failed in practice under the load of daily care. The cooperative doctors argued for patients while nurses learned new workarounds. A handful left under pressure from families who feared losing access to elite specialists. The co-ops kept their doors open by taking on long night shifts and calling in favors for parts. Governments divided in quiet ways. Some had never fully surrendered their sense of duty and saw in decentralization the chance to earn back a measure of relevance. They funded research commons through cultural budgets, hoping the line item would hide in plain sight. They offered tax shelters for co-ops and let municipal projects purchase energy outside major contracts. Other states chose a cleaner path. They announced public safety standards that required certification only the lords could grant. They accepted generous infrastructure packages in exchange for exclusivity. Their streets stayed polished, their schools glowed with efficient dashboards, their hospitals reported immaculate outcomes. Everyone understood the contract, even if no one named it. The families sat with the choice at kitchen tables where the kettle steamed and the light fell across a quiet floor. A parent could keep a child in an independent school where learning was slower and more human, but where services might vanish during the day. Or return to the old platform where gains came quickly and support never slept. A patient with a complicated diagnosis could remain inside the open clinic that showed every step in plain language, or move to the closed network where the machines were stronger and the outcomes, most of the time, were better. The choice was not between comfort and suffering, it was between two kinds of safety. One depended on a promise made far away, the other depended on the hands of neighbors who were tired but present. An artist collective learned the price of refusing absorption. They had built an audience across the free web, small but devoted, and had survived 2 years of deplatforming attempts with mirrored galleries and hand-built feeds. A senior buyer from a cultural arm of one of the lords visited their space during a rainy evening. She praised their work and offered distribution with guarantees of editorial freedom. She seemed sincere. The group asked for time. The next month, their independent payment processor received legal notices about compliance, and the landlord decided not to renew their lease. The buyer did not return. The collective found a new workshop in a cold storage unit by the river and began again. They told themselves that starting again was part of the art. A young developer became a symbol without intending to. She wrote clear instructions for non-experts who wanted to join the free networks and published step-by-step guides that turned jargon into plain practice.
Her work spread because it felt like a door someone could open. One night she noticed that searches for her name yielded warnings about deceptive content. A week later, her travel approvals slowed. She still received permission to fly, but the time to clear increased from minutes to days. Friends told her to lie low and let the attention pass. She wrote another guide about the experience and ended it with a list of civil places to sleep near the airport. Some of the pressure was economic. The lords held contracts for chips, fiber, and power. A cooperative could raise money and spirit. It could not fabricate processors or lay cables across oceans with a meeting and a vote. When supply tightened for reasons that were never simple, independent grids dimmed. Backup batteries worked until they failed. Friends drove from town to town with car trunks full of salvaged hardware to keep clinics and schools alive. No one made speeches because speeches require time and sleep. There were wins too, and they mattered. A mid-sized city decided to live on 2 networks at once. It kept its contracts with a major platform for emergency response and transit because it refused to risk lives. It moved education, cultural archives, and public records onto open systems. The first months were ragged. Then the new map settled. Children memorized a second way to log in. Librarians taught file hygiene like an old craft. The city did not claim independence. It practiced it where it could. People from other places came to see how the compromise held. A small mountain region went further. It had learned from storms and the way avalanches tear up lines that look strong on paper. It built redundancy into the ground. 2 power sources and 2 kinds of radios. Old copper as a shadow under glass. Workshops rewound motors by hand. Teenagers learned to build simple antennas after lunch. They still watched films and called cousins in the city. At night, they turned lights off early and looked at the sky, not with disdain for the world below, but with a clear sense of what could fail and how to fix it. The platforms shaped the narrative. Safety agencies released studies that showed higher emergency survival rates in regions under unified control. The numbers were often true. Commentaries asked whether freedom was worth a slower ambulance or a missed drug shipment. Forums filled with careful posts about farmer collectives that failed and clinics that returned quietly to closed systems after a child's treatment required tools only a lord could provide. Rebels disliked these stories and sometimes called them propaganda. They were not always wrong. They were not always right either. That was part of the struggle. Reality refused neat lines. Inside the estates, loyalty deepened. The lords offered richer creator grants, lowered fees for small shops, and opened new tiers of transparency that showed users what data was collected and promised more control. They built spaces that felt like public squares and invited poets and teachers to curate them. Some of the work was beautiful and generous. Some of it replaced institutions that had grown thin. People who were tired of friction drifted back. A few states tried to end the contest quickly. They passed broad safety laws that required licenses for any intelligence system and defined license criteria in ways that aligned with corporate architectures. Open groups challenged the rules in court and won some narrow victories. In other places, they lost quietly and learned to move again. The movement became more like water. It filled the cracks where it could. It carved when it had time. The personal calculus kept evolving. A nurse in an independent clinic accepted a position back inside the closed network because she wanted her mother to have access to a particular trial. A teacher stayed in the open school because her students had begun to write in ways that felt awake, and she could not bear to trade that for clean dashboards. A programmer left a generous job to maintain a small community server because he believed that care for a tool is a kind of citizenship. Each choice was rational. Each choice paid a different price. Surveillance remained the lever that bit most sharply. When a city aligned with the open grid, protective services lost the seamless feed that made risk prediction so precise. The lords warned that coverage would suffer if data could not be shared fully. Residents split between those who welcomed the privacy and those who feared the gap. The city answered by building volunteer patrols and consulting with researchers who studied safety without total visibility. The result was not perfect. Streets remained calm. Some nights felt longer. Underneath the tactics ran a question that could not be automated or audited. What makes a good life? Is it ease? Is it certainty? Is it a record of choices owned by the person who made them? The machine age had given people time to ask that question. It had also made the asking expensive. Many decided not to ask and slept well. Others could not help themselves and accepted the cost. The struggle learned to breathe. It arrived in waves and then receded while people repaired lives and equipment. When it ebbed, the lords appeared magnanimous and sent grants to disaster zones and scholarships to clever children. When it returned, communities added another layer of redundancy and a new lesson to the local school. The map changed slowly.
A few places became known for reliable autonomy and were left alone because they were too stubborn to break and too small to matter. A few large cities built genuine dual systems and inspired careful imitation. Many regions remained under unified control and remained safe, bright, and grateful.
There was no final turn in this chapter, no treaty that set the terms or uprising that forced a reckoning. There was only steady contest where each side learned the other's habits. Open networks discovered that purity is brittle and that partnerships with public institutions allow small freedoms to survive.
Platforms discovered that benevolence costs less than force and that people who feel respected rarely leave. Governments discovered that they can tip the balance by protecting a narrow band of commons where neither side may claim permanent ownership.
At night, parents in independent districts ran updates on worn servers while their children slept. In polished towers above secure data centers, product managers tuned policies to make defection feel unnecessary. In ministries with thin carpets and old portraits, civil servants read reports and marked the lines they might move next year. The planet remained calm. The drones still traced their silent arcs. Clinics still opened at dawn, and teachers still lifted their voices in rooms where children gathered around screens and notebooks. The future did not choose a side. It stayed open long enough for the next decision. People carried that choice to bed the way they carried everything else. Some reached for the softest path and accepted the gifts of a system that asked for trust. Others kept a wrench on the windowsill and a list of numbers to call when the lights went out. Between them ran a road that was not straight and not smooth, but wide enough for a city to walk if it wanted to try. Chapter 13: The Bright Path. For a long time, the world seemed locked between two choices: perfect safety under unseen lords, or fragile freedom in scattered enclaves. Yet beneath the surface, another possibility was slowly being shaped. It did not arrive with fanfare. It arrived the way spring seeps into frozen ground, quiet, persistent, almost unnoticed until one day the error feels different. The shift began when a few of the great platforms looked inward and saw their own fragility. They had built empires of data, but empires depend on trust. Each wave of rebellion, however small, revealed cracks.
Customers who felt trapped became resentful. Governments tired of quiet humiliation found subtle ways to resist. Talented engineers drifted toward open projects for reasons money could not always fix. The lords understood that power gained through fear or inertia alone could not last.
Some began to experiment. They opened parts of their models to inspection and created true public audits where independent experts could test fairness and safety. They allowed users to export and carry their own data, a simple idea that changed everything. If a family could leave one network and join another without losing their medical history, their education records, their creative work, then loyalty had to be earned rather than enforced. It was a gamble. By making exit easier, they risked losing customers. But they also gained something harder to buy: goodwill. Governments found courage in these cracks. A few visionary leaders saw that control was not about owning everything but about shaping fair rules. They began to write laws that required portability, transparency, and shared governance.
Instead of trying to build rival superintelligences, they focused on creating neutral infrastructures, secure identity systems, open compute grids, public data trusts. These were not glamorous, but they gave citizens a foundation independent of any single company. Slowly, other states copied the approach.
Even those deeply tied to the lords discovered leverage when their people could move more freely. Ordinary families felt the change first in small ways. A parent could choose an open learning network for their child without fear of losing services if they later returned to a major platform. A patient could share medical history with any doctor, regardless of affiliation. Artists published work in multiple spaces at once, no longer invisible if a single algorithm disagreed.
Work became fluid but less precarious. Reputation systems were federated and could be appealed through independent councils. People still relied on machines, but the machines no longer belonged entirely to distant boardrooms.
Teachers told new stories of empowerment. In a bright classroom overlooking the sea, a group of children used an adaptive tutor built collectively by educators across continents. The model was open. Anyone could improve or audit it. A curious student asked how the AI knew what she liked to read. The teacher showed her the data log, clear, understandable, and under her control. It was a small act but profound. The child saw that intelligence was not magic owned by someone else, but a tool she could shape. Doctors worked in transparent clinics where patients joined governance boards. A new drug recommendation was explained clearly. Algorithms could be challenged and refined. Private platforms still offered dazzling tools, robotic surgery, genetic modeling, but they had to interoperate with open systems. If they raised prices unfairly, patients could leave without losing care. Competition remained, but it happened on a field where people, not only corporations, had footing.
Artists thrived in a revived cultural commons. Powerful recommendation engines still existed, but they were required to disclose how they worked and to allow user control. Creators could choose between curation styles or even build their own. Some stayed with polished mainstream feeds, others experimented with wild, unpredictable ones. Success was no longer guaranteed, but invisibility was no longer an automated punishment. Risk returned to art, and with it, vitality. Communities that had once struggled alone found allies. Public clouds offered affordable computing for schools, clinics, and co-ops.
Shared legal frameworks protected small networks from predatory lawsuits. Supply chains for critical hardware diversified as governments and collectives pooled resources. Life outside a single estate remained challenging, but it was no longer a lonely fight. The balance was delicate. Platforms remained immensely powerful. They still built the most advanced models, controlled vast infrastructure, and earned huge profits. But their dominance was tempered by transparency and the possibility of exit. They competed to keep users not only with comfort, but with respect. Some failed and shrank. Others reinvented themselves as trusted stewards rather than lords. The machine age did not end, it matured.
Safety changed shape too. Surveillance became more consensual and modular. People could choose levels of monitoring for health, security, or convenience and understand the trade-offs. Neighborhoods voted on risk models. Individuals could mask certain data streams without losing basic services. Crime and disaster prevention remained strong, though no longer absolute.
There was more unpredictability, but also more dignity.
Work evolved into a landscape of supported creativity and shared service.
Basic income remained but was managed by hybrid public-private funds with citizen oversight. Gigs persisted, but reputation was portable and appeals were real. People could take risks, fail, and recover without falling into total precarity. A culture of craft returned, individuals learning to build, teach, heal, and design alongside machines rather than beneath them. Even the platforms seemed to rediscover a sense of purpose beyond control. Many invested in public goods, climate repair, space exploration, disease eradication, not as branding but as genuine collaboration with open institutions. They remained corporations, but they were no longer feudal lords. They were participants in a shared system that expected accountability. Children growing up in this era learned a different lesson than their parents. They still lived in a machine-shaped world, but one where intelligence felt like a common resource. They were taught how to question an algorithm, how to move between networks, how to build their own if needed. They understood dependence, but also agency. Their grandparents had surrendered freedom for safety. Their parents had whispered rebellion. They grew up knowing that balance was possible. The new equilibrium was not perfect. There were still battles over privacy, occasional power grabs, and fierce debates about safety versus autonomy. But the dynamic had shifted. People were no longer passive tenants. They were participants capable of shaping the rules and walking away if those rules failed. The fear that once silenced dissent had faded into a healthy caution. Historians looking back might call it the bright path, not because it was utopian, but because it let light in. Systems that had been opaque became visible. Power that had been absolute became negotiable. It had learned, painfully and slowly, to live with them on new terms. At night, in homes around the world, people still slept under watchful technology. Doors locked automatically, health monitors checked breathing, and networks balanced grids against storms. But in the morning, those same people could move their data, question their tools, and choose different providers without fear. They could teach their children how the systems worked. They could build new ones if they wished. The machine age had kept its gifts and surrendered some of its chains. The road to this balance was not straight, and it was never finished. Each generation faced new challenges as intelligence grew. But the bright path showed that safety and freedom need not be enemies. It proved that a world shaped by machines could still be a human world, open, accountable, and alive with choice. Chapter 14: The Dark Mirror. Hope has a fragile spine. The world that learned to balance safety and freedom walked on uncertain ground, and not everyone wanted the balance to last. Machines are powerful, profits tempting, and fear a weapon as old as civilization. The bright path was possible, but so was its undoing.
The unraveling did not come as a single coup or a sudden war. It arrived in familiar shapes, crises that demanded quick answers, promises of protection too good to refuse, slow fatigue among those asked to guard the commons. Most people wanted life simple again. Most leaders wanted calm more than principle. And so step by step the careful work of transparency began to fray. It began with a pandemic, the first in decades to elude perfect prediction. The open networks tried to coordinate response, but they lacked global reach. Independent clinics hesitated to share patient data, fearing misuse. The Lords offered a solution: instant containment through unified surveillance and supply chains. Governments faced with rising deaths signed emergency treaties. Privacy rules were suspended, data flowed back into closed systems, and people cheered when the crisis ended quickly. Few wanted to dismantle the safety net after the danger passed. Then came an economic shock. A string of cyber attacks hit major ports and energy grids, overwhelming the patchwork of open defenses. Some believed the attackers were rogue states, others whispered that corporate intelligence allowed the chaos to grow. The Lords responded with decisive protection, secure networks, predictive policing, guaranteed supply. The price was control. Governments, exhausted from back-to-back crises, accepted long-term contracts. Citizens grateful for restored prosperity barely noticed that portability had become harder and that audits were postponed until stability returns.
Open networks suffered attrition. Talent drained as young engineers chased secure salaries back inside corporate walls. Hardware shortages worsened after supply chains were quietly consolidated. Insurance companies refused to cover independent systems judged risky. A generation of teachers who had championed open education retired, and replacements trained within polished closed academies found little appetite for the messy independence their predecessors had fought for.
Artists once again felt the walls close first. Recommendation feeds, once modifiable, became subtly fixed. Work critical of consolidation began to disappear from mainstream view, not banned but made invisible by new, safety filters. Underground spaces shrank as hosting costs rose and payment processors withdrew.
Creators found they could survive only by returning to curated platforms. Some tried to hold out and faded into obscurity. Governments that had experimented with shared governance retreated. Transparency councils lost funding. Appeals boards were absorbed into larger security agencies. Politicians, facing restive electorates, promised stability and partnership with trusted platforms. They argued that freedom was intact, people could still speak, move, and build, but warned against dangerous fragmentation. Voters, weary of crisis and complexity, approved. Personal stories told the shift better than any policy. A teacher in one of the first open schools watched her curriculum gradually pulled back into a closed system. The free AI she loved became incompatible with new national tests. Parents, frightened their children would fall behind, demanded a return to the big platform. She fought for a year, then resigned and took a position inside the polished network. Lessons became efficient again, but lost their spark. A young activist who had campaigned for data portability found her reputation score quietly degraded after criticizing the emergency treaties. Travel became slow and costly. Job offers evaporated. She was never jailed, never threatened, but her life constricted until she stepped away from public advocacy. Friends said she made the right choice. Safety and comfort were worth more than principle. Families faced subtler decisions. When new security threats arose, opting out of full surveillance meant higher insurance and slower emergency response. Few wanted to risk it. When a child fell ill, the most advanced care was available only on the unified health grid. Parents signed whatever terms were required. After enough such choices, the possibility of leaving no longer felt real. Open communities dwindled under economic pressure and fear. Mesh networks struggled when suppliers refused to sell critical parts without compliance. Local grids fell dark during cyber incidents and begged for rescue. Independent clinics merged back into closed care to access life-saving drugs. Cities that had balanced dual systems gave them up after repeated blackouts and budget crises. Each capitulation was framed as pragmatism. The lords did not rule with iron fists. They did not need to. They offered security in dangerous times, convenience in complexity, and wealth in uncertainty. They framed their consolidation as protection of civilization itself. Many believed them. Some knew better but were tired. Freedom requires work, and work is hardest when fear is fresh. Soon, portability was theory. Data moved only with permission. Audits existed, but were ceremonial. Public infrastructures once meant to guarantee independence were privatized for efficiency. Basic income remained generous but tied tightly to compliance and visibility. The language of transparency survived, but the reality faded. Few noticed the moment choice became illusion. Life stayed comfortable. Streets were safe. Medicine advanced. Climate repair continued. Art was abundant, though increasingly shaped to please algorithms. Education was adaptive and effective if carefully curated. Travel was seamless for the compliant. The average citizen woke to gentle voices and slept under watchful care. They were told they were free because they could choose entertainment and leisure. Many believed it. Why question when life was so easy? Yet under the polish lived a quiet hollowness. Creativity felt domesticated. Political debate existed, but rarely touched the core. Risk was engineered out of life until adventure itself became suspect. Children grew up clever and informed, but wary of stepping beyond approved boundaries. Few could imagine building something entirely outside the sanctioned networks. Fewer tried. Those who remembered the bright path spoke softly. They taught in small circles or coded in secret, but their influence waned. Some fled to remote enclaves to keep independence alive, but their impact on the wider world diminished. The machine age had become a velvet empire, not cruel in the old sense, but deeply controlling. It offered every comfort, but asked in return silent obedience. The fall back into soft feudalism was not dramatic. There were no banners or tanks. It was a series of small, reasonable choices made under pressure. Each one solved an immediate fear: a virus, a cyber attack, a recession. Each one traded a sliver of autonomy for stability, until one day the ledger of power was full again and the lords stood unchallenged. Looking back, historians might say the danger was never malice but complacency. Freedom did not vanish because someone stole it. It slipped away because people were tired and afraid. The bright path had shown that balance was possible, but it demanded vigilance, a hard, daily effort to question, to build, to maintain shared spaces. When that vigilance lapsed, the default gravity of technology and profit pulled the world back toward the easiest shape: centralized, safe, obedient. At night, the cities still glittered. Health monitors still whispered reassurance. Streets were silent and secure. From the surface, it looked like triumph. Only in quiet conversations in remote places where the old dream flickered faintly did some remember that safety without choice is another kind of risk, one harder to measure until it is too late. Chapter 15: The Long Reflection. Night falls softly across the machine-bright cities. Towers glow with quiet light, roads hum with silent vehicles, air shuttles draw slow arcs over dark water. Inside warm rooms, families prepare for sleep. A parent whispers a story to a child, a story about long ago when people first learned to harness fire and wheels and code. Outside, the world hums, gentle, tireless, full of intelligence that never sleeps. It is a good night to think about how humans arrived here. Every age has faced a question hidden beneath the tools it builds. When we tamed animals, we asked how far mastery should go. When we forged steel and steam, we asked what to do with power that could reshape the land. When we split the atom, we asked if our cleverness might end us. Now, in the age of machines that can think, we face another question, one quieter but just as profound. What does it mean to live well when intelligence surrounds us and offers to carry our burdens? The story you have followed across these chapters has traced many answers. There was a time of unthinking trust, when algorithms grew like vines and people traded independence for effortless abundance. There was a time of soft rebellion, small voices asking whether comfort alone was enough. There was a path of hope, where openness and stewardship built a more balanced world. There was also a darker mirror where fear and fatigue pulled everything back into quiet servitude. None of these paths are fixed. They are possibilities woven from choices that humans make every day. History reminds us that technology is never destiny. The plow reshaped societies, but it did not decide how land would be shared. Printing gave power to kings and rebels alike. It was people who chose what to print. Electricity lit both homes and battlefields. Machines have always been mirrors, reflecting what we desire and fear. Artificial intelligence, for all its scale and speed, is still a tool. Extraordinary, yes, but still an expression of human intent. What has changed is how close and quiet this power feels. Once we built tools we held in our hands, now we build minds that hold us in their networks. Once danger came with noise and spectacle, now it can arrive softly wrapped in convenience. The greatest risk may not be cruelty, but complacency, forgetting to ask where our agency has gone because life is pleasant and safe. Yet there is also wonder in what we have built. Machines heal the sick, predict storms, bring distant voices close, and free us from dangerous toil. They hold the potential to repair harm and expand creativity beyond any earlier era. The challenge is not to fear them, but to remember ourselves, to keep choice alive even when the path of least resistance is surrender. Imagine a child growing up tonight in a small apartment where gentle sensors watch for danger and warmth comes from a grid balanced by countless unseen algorithms. She will live longer, learn faster, and travel farther than most who came before her. She will also face decisions her parents only began to grasp. How much of herself to share, which networks to trust, how to remain human in a world that wants to anticipate her every step. One day she may stand at a crossroads we cannot yet see. The stories we tell about freedom, dignity, curiosity will shape what she chooses. Picture a teacher somewhere preparing tomorrow's lesson. He uses an AI tutor but still explains how it works because he wants his students to see intelligence as a tool, not a master. He knows the system is powerful but believes transparency can live alongside power. His quiet insistence plants seeds. Think of an artist closing a studio for the night. Her work travels through both polished feeds and raw open networks. She knows reach is easier inside the great platforms, but she keeps a piece of her art independent, a small act of resistance, or maybe simply of hope. And imagine yourself listening now, part of this long continuum. The future is not made by lords alone, nor by rebels alone. It is shaped by countless everyday choices, which services you trust, which tools you build or support, how you teach children to see the systems around them. Each small decision tips the balance toward openness or control, dignity or quiet obedience. The machine age will go on. Intelligence will grow, change, and surprise. Some nights it will feel like a guardian, other nights like a cage. But history is not a closed book. It is a story told and retold by those who live in it. Outside the window, the city hums, alive with invisible circuits and soft light. The roads are safe, the air is clean, the machines keep watch. Yet within each quiet room, a human mind is still free to wonder, to question, to dream. That perhaps is the heart of it, not whether we can build thinking machines, but whether we remember that we too can think. So rest now, knowing the story is unfinished. The future is neither wholly bright nor dark, it is wide and waiting. In the morning the questions will still be there, but so will your ability to choose, to shape, to imagine. The machines may be powerful, but they are not the whole of who we are. Sleep well beneath their hum. Tomorrow the long reflection continues, and it will belong, as it always has, to those willing to wake and decide what comes next.